Have you ever heard that little voice inside your head saying, "You're not good enough. You'll mess this up." Or "Who do you think you are to try this?" That's your inner critic, the constant commentator of your life. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it screams, but one thing's for sure, it's always there. The question is that voice your friend, or is it an undercover saboteur? Let's start by being honest. We all have an inner critic. No one is immune to self-doubt. Whether you're a student, a leader, or an artist, that inner voice finds a way to sneak in and question your worth. It can show up before a big presentation, during a tough decision, or even when you're just scrolling through social media. It tells you that others are better, smarter, more deserving. It can make you feel small before you've even tried. But here's something worth understanding. Your inner critic wasn't born to destroy you. It actually began as a protector. As children, we learned through correction, "Don't touch that, it's hot. You should do better next time." Over time, that guidance morphed into an inner voice meant to keep us safe from failure, rejection, and shame. In its own strange way, your inner critic wants to help you avoid pain. It's the mental guardian that says, "Stay small so you won't get hurt." The problem, that same voice that once protected you can become the very thing that limits you. What once guarded you now imprisons you. The critic starts interpreting every challenge as danger. It convinces you to stay in your comfort zone, whispering, "Don't risk it. You're not ready." But in reality, it's not protecting you, it's sabotaging you. The inner critic is clever. It disguises itself as logic and practicality. It tells you you're being realistic, when really you're being fearful. It points out your flaws, your insecurities, your past mistakes, not to inspire change, but to keep you from changing. It's like a double agent inside your mind, pretending to be your ally while quietly undermining your confidence. So, what can we do? How do we know when our inner critic is being helpful and when it's sabotaging us? The answer lies in how you listen. You see, the goal isn't to silence your inner critic. That would be impossible. The goal is to retrain it. The next time that voice says, "You're not good enough," pause and ask, "According to whom?" When it says, "You'll fail," reply, "Maybe, but what if I succeed?" When it says, "You can't do this," calmly say, "I'm learning to." By questioning your inner critic instead of obeying it, you transform it from a saboteur into a strategist. Instead of letting it paralyze you, you let it prepare you. For example, if your critic says, "You're not ready for that promotion," take it as a cue to strengthen your skills, not abandon your dream. If it says, "You'll embarrass yourself," remind it that courage is not the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Reframing your inner critic takes time, but every small victory weakens its grip. With practice, that same voice can evolve. It can remind you to double, check your work, to plan carefully, to strive for excellence without destroying your confidence in the process. It can become a partner in your growth rather than a prisoner guard of your potential. So, is your inner critic a friend or an undercover saboteur? The truth is it's both. It's a friend that's been operating under outdated instructions. It needs your leadership to evolve. When you take charge, that voice learns to support your goals, not suffocate them. In the end, your inner critic doesn't have the final word, you do. You get to decide whether its voice builds you or breaks you. So the next time that voice starts whispering doubt, don't fight it and don't surrender to it. Just smile and say, "Thank you for your concern, but I'm in control now." Because when you learn to manage your inner critic, you don't silence it, you master it. And that's when your potential finally has the freedom to speak louder than your fear. The origins of the inner critic. Before we label our inner critic as a villain, it's worth asking, where did this voice come from? Why does it exist at all? Because no one is born with a voice that says, "You're not good enough." Babies don't criticize themselves for falling while learning to walk. They just get up and try again. So, if we weren't born with this voice, then it must have been created. The inner critic begins forming early in life. It grows from our environment, the voices of parents, teachers, peers, and society. As children, we absorb everything we hear. When we receive praise, we learn that we're worthy. When we face criticism, we learn that love and approval might depend on performance. So the mind creates a little guardian, a voice that says, "Don't make mistakes, stay quiet, don't be too different." That voice thinks it's protecting us from rejection and pain. At first, it helps. It stops us from touching a hot stove, speaking out of turn, or doing something reckless. It tries to guide us toward acceptance and safety. But as we grow older, that same mechanism doesn't evolve with us. It keeps using the same childhood strategies: fear, guilt, and comparison to keep us safe. The problem is, what once protected us as children can imprison us as adults. Imagine this: when you were young, someone might have said, "You're so careless," or "Why can't you be more like your sibling?" Those words didn't just disappear, they became part of your internal dialogue. So, years later, before starting something new, your mind replays those echoes: "Don't mess this up. You're not as good as them." It's not the real you speaking. It's the conditioning from years of judgment and comparison. In psychology, this is often called the internalized parent. It's not literally your parent's voice, but it carries the tone, the authority, and the power of those early figures in your life. And even when the people who inspired that voice are long gone, the critic stays repeating the same warnings, thinking it's keeping you safe. But safety isn't always freedom, and the inner critic doesn't understand the difference. That's why so many people feel trapped by their own thoughts. They're not lazy, unmotivated, or weak. They're simply caught in an outdated pattern of self-protection. Their critic keeps saying, "Don't take risks," because in the past, risk led to pain. But the truth is, in adulthood, risk is growth, failure is learning, and fear, when faced, becomes power. Let's take an example. Imagine a child who got scolded for getting bad grades. As an adult, that same person might avoid trying new things because they fear failure or judgment. Their inner critic says, "You're not smart enough." And not because it's true, but because once upon a time, failure meant losing approval. That voice isn't malicious, it's misinformed. It's still trying to protect a version of you that no longer exists. So what can you do about it? First, recognize that your inner critic has good intentions. It's not an enemy, it's just overprotective. It doesn't trust your strength yet. The moment you see that, something shifts. Instead of hating that voice, you can start understanding it. Instead of fighting it, you can start educating it. You can say, "Thank you for warning me, but I'm capable of handling this." You can remind it that you're not that fragile child anymore. You're an adult with resilience, wisdom, and experience. When you do that, the critic starts to relax. It begins to transform. It learns that growth doesn't equal danger, it equals evolution. And that's the beginning of mastery. You stop letting the critic dominate you, and instead, you become its guide. Because the truth is, your inner critic isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to protect you with the tools of your past. It just needs you to hand it new ones. So before you silence that inner voice, pause, listen, understand where it came from, then, gently but firmly remind it, "Thank you for keeping me safe, but it's time to let me live." That's how you start transforming your inner critic from an undercover saboteur into a wiser, more supportive inner companion. The voice of the saboteur. If the inner critic began as a guardian, then when did it turn into a saboteur? When did that voice, meant to protect us, start working against us? It happens quietly, so quietly that most people never notice. The transformation begins when the critic starts confusing safety with stagnation. It believes that avoiding pain means avoiding progress, and that's when it becomes dangerous. The inner critic is clever. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't attack you with obvious cruelty. It disguises itself as reason, logic, and realism. It says things like, "Maybe this isn't the right time. You're just being practical. Let's wait until you're fully ready." Sounds responsible, right, but beneath those reasonable words often hides fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. The saboteur knows that if it speaks in fear's true language, panic, anxiety, or insecurity, you might fight back. So instead, it puts on a mask of maturity and calls itself realistic. And slowly, you start to believe it. You stop applying for that promotion because you tell yourself it's not the right moment. You hold back from sharing your creative work because you say, it's not perfect yet. You silence your dreams with the excuse, I'm just being realistic. But what's really happening? Your saboteur is winning. It's convincing you to trade growth for comfort. It doesn't need to defeat you. It just needs to delay you long enough that you give up on yourself. Here's the thing about this undercover saboteur. It doesn't operate with cruelty, it operates with caution. It doesn't say, you're worthless. It says, you should be careful. It doesn't say, you can't do this. It says, what if you fail? And because it sounds like a concerned friend, we listen. But the cost of listening is subtle and deadly. Every time you obey that fearful whisper, a small part of you shrinks. The dream gets quieter. The fire inside dims a little more. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've built a life that's safe but small. Comfortable but unfulfilled. The voice of the saboteur thrives in silence and routine. It feeds on repetition. The more you listen to it, the stronger it gets. And soon, it becomes the default soundtrack of your thoughts. You're not ready. You don't belong. You'll mess it up. The saddest part? You start mistaking it for your own voice, but it's not you. It's just the echo of old fears that never learned how to trust the person you've become. To defeat the saboteur, you first need to recognize it. Catch it in the act. Notice its tactics. The moment you say, there you are again, you strip away its power. Awareness is the light that exposes the saboteur's disguise. Next, talk back to it not with anger, but with authority. When it says you're not ready, reply, maybe not, but I'm willing to learn. When it warns you'll fail, say, that's okay. Failure is a teacher, not a verdict. When it laughs, you can't. Look it in the eye and say, watch me. This simple act of defiance weakens the saboteur, because its strength depends on your silence. Once you respond, once you assert your power, it starts to retreat. The saboteur's biggest fear is your confidence, because confidence means action, and action is what destroys the illusion of fear. Remember, the inner critic turned saboteur isn't your enemy, it's just scared. It's the part of you that still lives in yesterday, terrified of the pain you once felt. But you're not that person anymore. You've grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. You've survived what the saboteur still fears. So when that voice tries to keep you small, remind it, thank you for your concern, but fear doesn't run this show anymore. That's when everything changes. Because in that moment, you stop letting your inner critic lead, and you start letting your courage speak. And when courage speaks, the saboteur falls silent. Learning to listen without obeying now that we've unmasked the inner critic's origins and exposed its saboteur disguise, let's talk about what comes next, how to live with it. Because here's the truth, you will never completely silence your inner critic. No matter how confident, experienced, or successful you become, that voice will always find a way to whisper. But you can learn a skill that changes everything, listening without obeying. The problem isn't that the inner critic speaks, the problem is that we treat every word it says as the truth. When it tells us, you're not good enough, we nod in agreement. When it warns, don't try that, you'll fail, we step back. The critic speaks and we obey. But what if we started treating it differently? What if, instead of obeying, we simply listen the way you'd listen to a worried friend who doesn't have all the facts? Think of your inner critic like an overprotective parent. It worries, exaggerates, and often panics. When it sees a new opportunity, it doesn't see growth, it sees danger. Its first instinct is to protect, not to empower. That's why you can't always trust its advice, but you also shouldn't completely ignore it. Because sometimes hidden inside its fear is a valuable message. The art lies in listening without surrendering. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say your critic says, you're not ready for this. Instead of instantly backing away, pause and ask, what part of me feels unprepared? Maybe you realize you just need a bit more knowledge or planning. The critic wasn't entirely wrong, it was just overreacting. So you take its feedback, not its fear. When it says you'll embarrass yourself, ask, is that fear or fact? Usually it's fear, and once you recognize that, its power weakens. By questioning the critic instead of obeying it, you shift from reactive to reflective. You start having a dialogue instead of a dictatorship in your mind. And that dialogue builds emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and confidence. Let's be clear, the goal isn't to destroy the critic. You need it. Without it, you might act recklessly, make impulsive choices, or ignore real risks. The critic's job is to challenge you, but your job is to decide when that challenge is helpful and when it's harmful. This balance is like driving a car with a GPS. Your inner critic might warn, turn around, this road looks scary, but you, the driver, have the final say. You can acknowledge the warning, check the road, and still decide to keep driving. Because sometimes the road that scares you most is the one that leads to growth. One powerful technique is to name your inner critic. Give it an identity separate from yourself, maybe call it the inspector, misdoubt, or even Captain Safety. By naming it, you remind yourself that this voice is not you, it's just a part of you. That small shift helps you create emotional distance, allowing you to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Another tool is gratitude. Strange, right, but thank your critic. When it says, "You can't handle this," respond with, "Thank you for trying to protect me. I've got this." That gratitude disarms it. The critic thrives on resistance. The more you fight it, the louder it gets. But when you acknowledge it with kindness, it begins to soften. Listening without obeying also requires trust in your resilience, trust in your ability to recover, and trust that mistakes don't define you. When you stop fearing failure, the critic loses its leverage. It can warn you, but it can't control you. Every great achiever you admire, from artists to entrepreneurs, has learned this skill. They hear their critic, but they don't bow to it. They use its warnings as information, not as verdicts. So the next time your inner critic starts its familiar routine, don't silence it and don't surrender. Just listen, question, and choose your own truth. Because maturity isn't about erasing the inner critic, it's about mastering the conversation. When you learn to listen without obeying, you reclaim your freedom. You turn the inner noise into inner wisdom, and slowly, that once hostile voice becomes something far more useful, not a command, but a conversation that helps you grow into your strongest self. Rewriting the inner script. Once you've learned to listen to your inner critic without obeying it, you reach the next stage, rewriting the script it speaks from. Because every thought that repeats in your mind creates a kind of mental script, and most of us are still living inside stories that were written years ago by fear, by failure, or by the voices of others who once doubted it. Here's the truth: your inner critic doesn't invent new ideas. It just replays old ones. It's like an outdated movie reel that keeps showing the same scenes of your mistakes, your embarrassments, your disappointments. The critic believes it's doing you a favor by reminding you not to repeat those painful experiences. But in reality, it traps you in the past, making you relive pain instead of learn from it. To rewrite your inner script, you first need to recognize the narrative your critic is using. Ask yourself, what story does my inner voice keep telling me about who I am? Maybe it says, "You're not disciplined enough, you always mess things up," or "You're not meant for success." These aren't facts, they're scripts written during moments of self-doubt or rejection. And here's the beautiful part: just as those stories were written, they can also be rewritten. The human mind is incredibly adaptable. Through awareness and repetition, we can literally rewire the brain to think differently. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's neuroscience. When you replace self-criticism with constructive reflection, your brain begins forming new pathways. Over time, those new pathways become your default responses. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What can I learn from this?" Rewriting your script starts with your language. Words are powerful, they shape identity. The inner critic thrives on absolutes. You always fail. You never get it right. You can't. But growth-oriented language sounds different. I'm improving, I'm learning, I'm getting closer. So the next time your critic speaks in extremes, edit its words like an editor would fix a manuscript. If it says, "You're terrible at this," Rewrite it as "you're still figuring this out." If it says "you failed," change it to "that attempt didn't work, what's next?" Each rewrite weakens the old narrative and strengthens the new one. Visualization also helps. Imagine your inner script as a written story, one you can literally hold in your hands. Turn the page where your critic wrote, "You'll never make it," and write instead, "I am learning, growing, and improving every day." The mind believes what it sees repeatedly. If you want to change your reality, change the words you feed your mind. Another crucial step is forgiveness, especially self. Forgiveness. Many inner critics feed on guilt. They remind you of every mistake, every missed chance, every moment you weren't at your best. But the critic forgets something vital: you've evolved. The person who made those mistakes doesn't exist anymore. You've learned since then. You've grown. You can't move forward while clinging to the language of self. Punishment. Forgiveness is how you set the pen back in your own hand. And remember, rewriting doesn't mean lying to yourself or pretending everything's fine. It means telling a truer story, one that includes your growth, resilience, and capacity to change. It means acknowledging, "Yes, I've struggled, but I'm still standing." It means redefining failure as feedback and fear as fuel. Over time, your new script becomes your new identity. The voice that once said, "You can't," starts saying, "You're getting closer." The one that said, "You'll never," begins whispering, "You're learning." And the day will come when you catch yourself automatically encouraging yourself and realize the script has changed. Rewriting the inner script isn't a one-time act. It's a daily decision. Every morning, every setback, every success, you get another chance to write how your story continues. So pick up the pen. Don't let the old narrator tell your story any longer. Write a script that honors your growth, your courage, and your becoming. Because your inner critic only knows the past, but you, my friend, have the power to write the future. Befriending the inner voice. By now, we've exposed, understood, and rewritten the narrative of the inner critic. But there's one final, and perhaps the most powerful step in mastering this voice, befriending it, that may sound strange. Why would you want to befriend something that has caused you so much doubt, fear, and hesitation? But here's the truth: your inner critic isn't your enemy. It's simply a misguided ally. It's the part of you that wants to help but doesn't know how. It loves you, but it loves safety even more. The key is not to fight it, but to form a partnership with it, one rooted in understanding, balance, and compassion. Think of your inner critic like a loyal guard dog. It barks every time something new approaches, not because it hates you, but because it wants to warn you of possible danger. If you yell at it or ignore it, it barks louder. But if you acknowledge it, reassure it, and guide it, it eventually relaxes. It learns to trust you. That's what befriending the inner critic looks like, transforming its energy from fear into focus. When you treat your critic as a teacher rather than a tormentor, something beautiful happens. You stop living in resistance. You stop wasting energy on fighting yourself. Instead, you begin to work with yourself. The inner battle becomes an inner alliance. Here's how that transformation unfolds. Start by meeting your inner critic with curiosity instead of condemnation. When it says you'll fail, instead of saying, "Shut up, I don't want to hear it," try asking, "Why do you think that?" Often, you'll realize that voice is triggered by something deeper: a fear of rejection, a past embarrassment, or an old wound that never healed. By understanding where it's coming from, you begin to see that your critic isn't cruel, it's afraid. And when someone or something is afraid, the most powerful response isn't anger, it's compassion. The next step is to redefine its role. Instead of letting it be a judge, make it your advisor. Let it raise questions, but not make decisions. Let it highlight risks, but not dictate your path. You might say to yourself, "Thank you for your input, but I'll decide what to do next." That simple statement places you back in charge while honoring the critic's original intention to protect. In time, your inner critic can evolve into what psychologists call your inner coach. The coach still challenges you, but from a place of faith rather than fear. It says you can do better, but it also says, "I believe you can." It pushes you toward excellence, not away from action. To strengthen this relationship, practice self talk that blends honesty with encouragement. If your critic says, "That wasn't good enough," reply, "You're right, I can improve and I will." Notice the balance. You acknowledge truth without judgment. That's the voice of emotional maturity. Over time, this compassionate communication creates harmony within you. The fear-driven critic that once shouted, "Don't try," becomes the calm voice that says, "Take the next step, you're capable." The internal chaos turns into clarity. And here's something magical when you learn to befriend your inner critic. You also transform how you relate to others. You become more forgiving, more patient, and more empathetic, because you've learned how to extend grace inward first. Befriending the inner critic doesn't mean you'll never hear doubt again. You will. But when it comes, you'll recognize it not as an enemy, but as an old companion checking in, one that you can smile at and say, "I appreciate your concern, but I've got this." That's the essence of true inner strength, not the absence of fear, but the ability to walk confidently beside it. So, when you hear that familiar whisper in your mind, the one that says you're not enough, not ready, or not worthy, take a deep breath, smile, and reply, "Thank you for caring, but today I choose courage over caution." That's how you turn your inner critic into your inner companion, a voice that still speaks, but now speaks in your favor. That's not just peace of mind, that's personal power. So here we are after unmasking the voice that lives in all of us. We've traced its roots, exposed its disguises, learned to listen without surrender, rewritten its story, and even dared to befriend it. And now, as we stand at the end of this journey, one truth becomes clear. Your inner critic is not your enemy. It's your untrained a voice that once tried to protect you, but forgot when to let you grow. For years, many of us have allowed that voice to drive the car of our lives. It has steered us away from opportunities, kept us parked in fear, and convinced us that safety was success. But today, it's time to take back the wheel, because while your inner critic may have a seat in the car, it doesn't belong in the driver's seat. That spot belongs to you. You see, life isn't about silencing every doubt. It's about turning the volume down just enough to hear your own courage again. The voice of your critic may never disappear, but the voice of your confidence can grow stronger. And when it does, that inner critic transforms from a saboteur into a guide, one that helps you prepare without paralyzing you, one that corrects without crushing you, one that questions without condemning you. Think about it. Every person who's ever done something remarkable, started a business, performed on stage, spoken their truth, has heard their inner critic too. The difference is, they didn't let it have the final say. They acknowledged it, but they acted anyway. They learned that bravery doesn't mean muting the inner critic. It means moving forward with it, whispering doubt in one ear and determination in the other. So the next time that voice rises inside you, the one that says, "You're not ready, you'll fail, or you're not enough," don't fight it and don't obey it. Smile, recognize it for what it is, an echo from the past trying to survive in your present. Then gently say, "Thank you for your concern, but I'm in charge now." And as you say those words, watch what happens. The noise quiets, the fear softens, the confidence returns. Because every time you choose courage over caution, every time you rewrite the script and step forward anyway, you're not just silencing a voice, you're reclaiming your power. Remember, your inner critic's job was never to destroy you. It was to test your strength. And every time you rise above it, you prove that strength is not found in perfection, but in persistence. So, walk boldly, speak loudly, live freely, and let that inner voice, once your biggest obstacle, become your greatest ally. Because the real victory isn't when the inner critic stops talking. It's when it starts talking your language, the language of growth, courage, and possibility. And when that day comes, you'll realize something truly liberating. Your inner critic was never your enemy. It was just waiting for your leadership.